Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome to my presentation, exploring the phenomenon's connection to the afterlife. Today's date is October 12th, 2024. My name is Jeff Selver, and I am the author of The Rising and the Alien Plan to Build an Enlightened City on Earth. My book can be purchased from my website, www.jeffselver.com. As those of you who are following my story will know, transparency is my motto, and I have done everything I can to validate my story. So I've passed a lie detector test, have videos of UAP, and I just posted a new one on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page. I've consistently documented the ever-growing list of corroborations with my contact events, with such series on my YouTube channel as Paranormal BC, how UAP whistleblowers keep matching what aliens said to me, to analyzing similarities between mine and experiencer and author of The Dual Soul Connection, The Alien Agenda for Human Advancement, Susie Hansen's contact events. The reason I do this isn't for some kind of ego trip, but it's because I don't take your belief in me for granted. And so today's presentation, Exploring the Afterlife, is just another of the long list of corroborations my story has with the surprising elements of the phenomenon. So today's agenda, what's in store? First, I'll give a detailed description of my experience seeing the afterlife during my first contact event with non-human intelligence back in 1993. Then I'll compare the details of my details of reports from both near-death experiences and between life regressions against my afterlife vision. In my research, I found that the descriptions of the realm of the afterlife during between life regressions had similarities to people's experience on craft and with non-human intelligence, something I feel holds the key in understanding the nature of the phenomenon. So in this section, I show those points. As a spiritualist, I couldn't help but be amazed at the clear message about the purpose of our existence from these reports and the spiritual values that we can learn from them, which, when we can apply to our daily life, can free us. Lastly, as my contact with the elder has progressed, the main gray alien that I communicate with, I have an interesting story to share in which she has shown me where they are from and its relationship to the afterlife. Plus, I'll show how we have government documentation that demonstrates those who are in the know in the government agencies have knowledge of this. At least they have to some degree. Then they've had that knowledge for quite a long time. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A. So Dr. Gary Nolan, co-founder of the Soul Foundation, a UAP research-oriented think tank, found through MRI imaging that a bundle of nerves at the caudate nucleus, an area of the brain associated with intuition, had overdeveloped interactions in experiencers. His findings were consistent with multiple labs. Now, I have long reported the very first day I went public that I saw my past life on an alien spacecraft, which occurred the same day I would see the afterlife. And just in case, for those who don't believe, the research around past life awareness is growing. Jim Tucker, the director of Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, has found case studies that provide persuasive evidence that some children do in fact possess memories of past lives. All over the world, scholars studying reincarnation are making findings even skeptics have difficulty explaining. The scientific method is being used on past life awareness, and it is coming out with positive results. So when I saw my own past life back in 1993, it would become a seed, planting a frame of reference for my awareness that would eventually grow. It would be well over a decade till I would understand that images and sensations I was experiencing through visions were in fact past life awareness, and an additional 5 years till I would begin finding proof for myself that my visions were in fact of real past lives I'd lived as individuals. And when I say proof for myself, I refer to details, whether cultural or means of living, for that persona which lived in that era of history, details that my conscious mind had no knowledge of. Now, the point I made about Gary Nolan in the beginning is that, yes, when people have interactions with the phenomenon, the consciousness can have expansion. And that's what ended up happening here. Throughout my entire life, I've been basically continuously gaining awareness of a list and a growing list of past lives. And the point that I'm making here is that it'll actually help explain what the reason why the aliens did what they did with me. And just a point to make, not a single past life was discovered using hypnotic regression. So I'm taking this opportunity here to put on record a linear timeline of my past lives. The farthest back I have a memory of is being a Denisovan. In all these cases, it's intense emotions that permeate through time. And in this, he lost both his mate through childbirth and his child through sickness, and was sadly alone in an isolated forest without a community, actually. In another life, possibly in the early Mediterranean, this fellow was on a boat that ran into a reef and sunk, losing his brothers. And he was the sole survivor on a beach, crying, and couldn't figure out, if he should go swim to the bottom of this ocean looking for his brothers, or if that was too dangerous. In another, I was a woman who washed clothes in with the pyramids in sight, and she was doing something for the pharaoh, at least religiously, washing clothes for the pharaoh. Having grown up on an island in another life, and so basically halfway through this life, invaders conquered the island and took over, and the land then belonged to the kingdom. At some point, I was in Thebes, and the Greek city of Thebes, and I'm aware of that. I can gone back to some of the pictures, and I can feel the environment and the landscape. And I was a horse owner, I know that, and I went to war there. Then I had a past life as a plebeian general at the end of the Roman Republic, who is recorded by ancient sources. I will go public with this in my next presentation, as the visions are prolific and detailed. This is my fun. I'll be able to go toe-to-toe with Roman historian academics with detailed knowledge of Roman religion and law from this past life's perspective, and be able to provide light on things missed by historians. Importantly, I will tell a version of historical events that will differentiate between fact and storytelling. After living a life as an oppressor as a Roman general, I then lived as the oppressed as a Jew in Roman-occupied Judea. At one point, I was an indigenous individual in the Pacific Northwest. Then I was an archer defending a fortress that I'm convinced was in the Afghan Kush Mountains, and fighting off an invading force whom I'm convinced was Genghis Khan's army. This life died with an arrow in his chest and air leaking out of his lung. At some point, I was a monk conducting civil administration role for a village that reported back to an empire with bamboo structures, and I'm convinced it was in Asia. Now, these are the last 4 lives that lead up to the present that actually shape the aliens' interaction with me. So around the 1600s, I was a Spanish monk. Though the life is very boring, he loved the Bible and loved reading about the Bible and studying the Bible, and serviced local villages. Then in between, the next life here, I was a woman who was betrothed to an abusive man, and she took her own life, and she did so by drowning. That seems to have created a physical disability in the hand of the next life. This is consistent with Michael Newton's research, that the lives we choose are designed to rectify personality traits from previous lives. That an incarnation with a perceived limitation is designed to balance out aspects of ourselves that were previously overcompensated, just like the Roman general who was the oppressor, then in the next life became the oppressed. So as a baby, because of the disability, he was left out by his family, and a Buddhist temple took him in. I already had this memory when I eventually would learn in Nepal, in the area where I knew this life was, that in fact did happen as a tradition. Disabled orphan babies became rescued by temples, and that's what I was. The temple was in the Himalayan mountains. He ends up being very humble and gets ordained. And like me in this life, with a similar pattern in which he leaves the temple to spread messages of his teachings, which happened in my life in relationship to the aliens. I leave my life for a kind of a spiritual purpose. He ends up living in a life, but his life, he ends up remaining in some kind of a city, pushing carts and talking about love, but being ridiculed because of his disability. Then the last life, so the next one from this one, but the last one to me, I was a Jewish young man in Poland during the Holocaust. So what happens is he's running away from the Nazis and eventually gets caught, but he's always trying to love. And it's a strange contradiction. I have tons of memories of trying to console people who are lost and in pain and suffering. And then vice versa, when I'm caught or he's caught, he's trying to love his captors and they're abusing him. And it's also because he was on path to become a rabbi, and he was young, so they really liked that. And he basically is driven to despair through torture, and it's pretty awful. It's pretty well documented that in Jewish concentration camps during World War II, that they experimented on prisoners through drugs and torture. And also, in Vedic philosophy, it's known that the state of mind you have at the point of death determines what happens when you cross over. And something along those lines happened here. This past life was born with some kind of open and vulnerable heart from his previous life, and then the deplorable conditions he was tortured in, especially from the drugs, put his ethereal body into some kind of damaged state. And the result is that when he passes on, gray aliens at this point are in the afterlife looking for souls to recruit. And this damage that has happened to the ethereal body of the past life Holocaust young child or young kid is very interesting to the gray aliens to help, basically, like an exchange. If we help rectify him, you can help us and we can kind of work together. And that's what ends up happening. So fast forward 1993. At the age of 16, I made an agreement with gray aliens to discover my soul. The bottom line is that agreement was actually already made prior, but they still needed this guy's agreement. So that happened at the age of 16. And I go into a white room. In that very contact event to make that agreement, I go into a white room. And in this room, it's a dimensional room. I'm turned into an orb, and it's pretty extreme. And within that, they eventually show me the afterlife. And so I'm in this dimensional room, and I go into a portal. And as an orb, I was in darkness. Except in front of me was a single body lit up, about 20 feet away, lying face down, giving the impression it had died. Over top of it was a beautiful, sparkling white light. So right over here was the dead body of my last Jewish life, the Holocaust. Now, the 16-year-old doesn't know that. It knows it's a past life. He can feel it, but he doesn't know the history. But as I said earlier, this ended up being kind of a wedge in my awareness that would expand over my lifetime. I could clearly feel an impression of the passing of time before my birth and knew I was watching the death of my most recent past life, 50 or 60 years ago, placing this vision in the 1930s or 40s. It's me. I'm alive. I've been alive. I was sharing in this soul's experience, confirming without a doubt that it was me. And he was young, in his 20s, crying and sad for his own death. The beautiful, shimmering white light was going somewhere, rising higher and higher, lamenting all the way. As the light energy rose, it stopped at a certain level or plateau. I watched my past life persona entering a realm humans would simply understand as the afterlife. It was a distinguishable, dimensional veil that seemed intelligently created, purposefully separating the two worlds, and it looked like it was in the Earth's upper atmosphere, possibly in space, though invisible to human eyes. The past life energy moved through the veil when there was a dissemination of knowledge of what it really was, forming into a very different being represented as an image of a man with a beard and a long, white, flowing gown. This being was not affected by or was detached from the pain the last life had experienced, simply gaining its awareness back to its true identity. The impression was that the image of the man in the gown was superimposed over top of an incomprehensible dimensionality of myself, a power of a completed universal awareness. It was still me, but an evolved me, and felt deep defined as the one who volunteers its energy to live out lives here on Earth. I am presently convinced the elder produced this image, the main gray alien I was with at the time, as a way of symbolizing what is known as the higher self, so my human mind could comprehend it. There was no doubt that the higher self was me and not an illusion, as its feeling was that of my spirit or intuition, yet here it was in a fully personified form. As soon as the dissemination of knowledge occurred, I witnessed the spirit or energy of a gray alien approach my higher self. I was astounded they were in this realm. There was a communication between the two, and I could discern that the Greys saw the direction humanity was headed in. So they were looking for lives to join their cause. And with my higher self, they saw an opportunity, which it agreed to. Now, the full detail of here, what happens, I now have more understanding of this actually transaction. I won't get into it here, but I'll talk about that later in the presentation. But what happened next were clips of events the elder desired me to see, which occurred between the death of my last life and the birth of my present life. I witnessed in the 1940s or 50s that a group of Greys, after coming up from Earth down below, acknowledged that humans made a choice about something significant, which I couldn't grasp, which affected these higher realms. It was a specific event or moment, and once it had occurred, it was assured how the next decades would go. My higher self was waiting for that choice to be made by humans, and once it was, in response, began planning my next life, which was me, Jeff Selver. What I saw next was my higher self interacting with a large, immaculate grid suspended in the air, and I knew that it aligned all the physical Earth bodies that had gray alien DNA with the souls that are embodied in them. Each line of the grid was connected by a node that my higher self could open up and see groupings of humans. The groupings seemed larger than biological families, like relational or spirit groups. Each of the nodes were connected in the grid, showing how they played a part with the population as a whole. I could feel and experience my higher self the more I observed, and it was clear while its awareness was on Earth in preparation for building the next life, it was also in other realms. My higher self has the ability to make offshoots of other full body or complete awarenesses and explore or be in other realms simultaneously. It is a multifaceted awareness, unaffected by space, going far into the universe. I witnessed an actual dimensional space of reprieve for beings who embody physicality. There were actual physical-like structures there, and it was a social environment. My higher self had friendships with other beings who embody in different places, realms, or planets. Most of all, if human eyes looked at this location, they would see empty space, a place in the universe void of galaxies or stars. But there was a dimensional place there. From this, I saw clearly that the universe is made up of layers of lands, and that is what the universe actually is, layers of dimensional spaces placed on top of one another. My observation now shifted to a room in a physical ship where the Greys and my higher self were standing around a rectangular table. I could feel it was the 1970s as my higher self had finished planning out the next incarnation. In the background, I saw a Grey being working on a computer in front of the holographic timeline. Seeing this, I understood with amazement that the Greys have life or incarnation designing technology for designing the life events of beings that will incarnate. In the room, my higher self generated an intense surge that expelled out an outline of my body, the me who I would become, inside of a cocoon of energy, which was then placed on the table. After a procedure was conducted on the ethereal body, the energy cocoon had become a blue orb, and it was being placed in the womb of my mother by the Greys. It was at this point the vision ended. The rest of that detail is in my book, and I presented on it in several different locations, available on my YouTube channel as well, too, the whole story. But this is a clip more detailed than I've ever gone in before, at least visually.